What we're getting now is we're getting an accelerated response to what we are doing, because we are providing the quality of leadership which in principle it seems that nobody else is doing. There are the good things happening in New York State, good things happening here and there, good programs, good ideas. But you need something more than that. You need a punch. You've got to hit a flanking operation. You've got to outflank this problem, because you cannot just push against it. You have to let it come in where it gets into a position where they have outflanked themselves, and then you can do something about it. And that's what we've been doing. We've been running a flanking operation.
During this past week, LaRouchePAC has drawn the enemy onto the field of battle. In Atlanta, at the National Caucus of State Legislators Convention, the fight which LaRouchePAC catalyzed, which resulted in a number of state representatives filing and motivating a resolution demanding immediate congressional action to reinstate Glass-Steagall, smoked out a veritable army of Wall Street thugs, who spent the week engaged in a desperate and hysterical campaign to shut this resolution down through lies, bullying, and intimidation. This effort, on the part of the representatives of Wall Street, backfired, doing nothing but energizing and inspiring those dedicated to fighting for Glass-Steagall to fight that much harder.
It's clear that the fight over the Glass-Steagall resolution was the main event at this week-long convention, and it started actually before the convention, because we discovered when we got there it was supposed to have been voted on initially in the Financial Services Committee. There was a representative from Delaware who had been planning to introduce it there, and her resolution was on the website of the National Conference of State Legislators, so it was well known.
This condensed a lot of other work and now sets in motion a whole new stage of work. Many of you helped build for this in the days just before the Atlanta conference by calling and emailing many of the legislators going there. We reached probably with messages by phone or direct contact 75% of the people of the legislators going there. It upped a certain background factor in people's mind as they were arriving that something was up.
So just as we had been calling members of this committee, and I think 3 or 4 of them actually have been co-sponsors of Glass-Steagall resolutions in their home states, so we were mobilized. The Wall Street lackeys acting on behalf of the Queen of England and her depopulation agenda were also highly engaged. And we know this because when we reached some people, like I reached one representative whom we had not spoken with before from a state that is not one of the states with a Glass-Steagall resolution yet, and he said, "Oh, I just got a call about that." And I said, "From whom?" He said, "Oh, from the State Bank Association. They called me this morning." They called in the morning before the conference began. And I said, "Oh, what did they say about Glass-Steagall?" And he said, I said, "Who was it again?" He said, "The bankers." I said, "Oh, they probably were against it." He said, "Yeah, I think that's right." At this point, everybody in the universe thinks that people on Wall Street should be going to jail. It's public knowledge that they were rigging the interest rates and setting up these cities to be ripped off. So the bankers were resorting to telling these legislators, look, it's a very complicated issue. You should really not stick your neck out. Just remain neutral, which is very funny. So there was a huge mobilization going into this conference from both sides, from the LaRouchePAC and all of our volunteers around the country, all the work that we've done in the state legislatures, and from the side of Wall Street.
So what happened there is we didn't go in with the idea of discussing Glass-Steagall. We went in there with the idea of drawing out from people their outrage over the criminality, the killer policies that are destroying the country. The event on Monday, where we had 15 minutes in front of the committee that had been assigned the resolution, was a break with the unreality of things in such a shocking way that even the friends of Glass-Steagall, I think, were shocked. Suddenly, there was just a dimension of reality here that very few people had anticipated. It sent shockwaves out.
So this was extremely powerful. The bankers were totally freaked out. The other thing of note is there were people in the hearing. There were a lot of people at this event, the labor union activists and others, who were on our side, who really wanted Glass-Steagall to be passed. They knew it was necessary, and they were also highly moralized that such a fight was occurring.
I'm here to motivate the passage of the resolution that calls for the reenactment by the United States Congress of the Glass-Steagall Act of 1933. 25 states this year have introduced resolutions calling for the Congress to restore Glass-Steagall. In the U.S. House of Representatives, there are now 75 co-sponsors of the bill to restore Glass-Steagall. In the last month, 10 U.S. senators have joined in. So I'm calling on you to support the Glass-Steagall Act.
The cat is out of the bag. When Glass-Steagall was knocked down, we allowed the commercial and the investment bankers to get together. It's a rigged game, people. We must put that wall back up and separate that down. Dodd-Frank is not working. 25 states have introduced these legislations to restore Glass-Steagall. Congress has a bill in both the Senate and in the House. It is growing daily. People are seeing what's going on with the markets, and we can no longer bail out the banks and not bail out the people. We can save the people. A lot of the banks can take care of themselves. We just put the Glass-Steagall back into place. I ask for everybody's courage. I ask for everybody's commitment. It's going to be difficult. There's going to be millions of dollars spent against this up in Washington to stop this from happening. And this is the only thing I see that's going to save the people in my district and maybe rebuild the infrastructure of the United States so we can leave a future for our children. And that's what we're here for.
I'm Marlon. I'm a former state legislator from 1999 to 2007 from the state of Michigan and the city of Detroit. Now, our city has now recently filed for bankruptcy, but not in the traditional manner, not with the mayor and the city council saying it was an imposed bankruptcy imposed by the state. Unless you re-erect Glass-Steagall so you can stop the bleeding, our pensioners have now been made vulnerable because although our state constitution guarantees the pension, when you go to federal bankruptcy court, all bets are off. So I'm just here to ask you to send to the larger body for deliberation this resolution for Glass-Steagall. Thank you.
I can't begin to tell you just what the shockwave this set off. A certain detonation charge went off there, and the banking crowd was in a real bind. They didn't know what they could control in this situation, so they went with the thuggery. They went with what they know how to do in these situations. They leaned hard enough so that the next day when we all went in for the actual debate in the committee to report it out to the full plenary, I was sitting behind some of these bozos, and suddenly they were whispering, "She's going to withdraw it. She's going to withdraw it." They figured they had it in the bag.
What happened was the representative from Delaware came under excruciating pressure, and what they did was they really pressured her whole delegation. That J.P. Morgan, as they had threatened in the banking committee hearing months ago, was threatening to pull 26,000 jobs out of the state. It would be very bad for the state. So the following morning, she withdrew the resolution.
And indeed, it was a moment of real sort of classical tragedy. They had gone through every other resolution. This one they had sort of kept for last. And it came to her to introduce it, and she was convulsed, and she really was in great agony. And she said, "I, under very strong counsel and pressure of my delegation, withdraw this." The bankers were ecstatic. They thought they had this thing completely run off the rails. What it actually was that moment of saying the cranes of Ibycus, because the murmurs, the kind of psychological effect as this spread. There was enough anticipation that there was going to be a debate. There was enough anticipation that this was going to be treated in a normal manner, that it was completely singular that anyone would withdraw a motion which had this kind of traction.
What occurred is then she said, "I still support Glass-Steagall, but because of pressure from my delegation, I have to withdraw this." So that was very fascinating, and everybody really sort of smelled a rat. At any rate, the way these things tend to work, if we are determined and you sink your teeth in and don't give up, is that it actually became a phenomenal organizing opportunity because so many people were so angry that the resolution had been withdrawn.
So it, in fact, raised the question in so many minds, even that afternoon, before we got out our own leaflet that really crystallized the response from most people. People were coming up to ask us, or we would be bringing it up, and they would say, yes, I'd heard about this. What was going on? Why did she withdraw it? What's happening? So it created a very tense but very useful transparency where suddenly this thing leaped up into a burning question in many, many people's minds. What is going on here? And then when we were handing out the leaflets at all the hotels where all the shuttle buses were loading up people, we were just identifying for people. It's not going down well with the legislators here that they're being bullied and pushed like this by killers who are wrecking their cities, wrecking their pensions, wrecking their jobs, wrecking the future of this country. And people were nodding vigorously, and it crystallized in a lot of people's minds something that had to be brought out in a way that was visceral rather than merely verbal. So the enemy's actions had created that murmur that was growing through it. It also precipitated a higher degree of fight from friends of ours there. Some of them were people from the state efforts to lead the resolutions for Glass-Steagall, and they had come in, and they were willing to, they were anxious to see the Glass-Steagall get through and cooperate with us, but they weren't necessarily in a complete fighting, storm the hill and take the hill kind of mode. This action of bullying this legislator and trying to get the resolution withdrawn fired up a key core of people working with us so that they were prepared to absolutely make sure that this was going to be a fight that was going to explode. What we discovered is that you could introduce it as an amendment to a resolution that was going to be debated in the general session. The very end of the entire week, they had a general business meeting to review all of the initiatives that had been presented before committees during the week. And you could not amend anything that had passed the committee unanimously, but if there were resolutions that had not passed unanimously, they were up for debate. So we scoured the resolutions, and we found one that had to do with reducing state budget deficits. So what happened in the plenary is that a woman from Maine who was working with us got up, asked for the microphone, introduced the amendment, and they had to flash the amendment on two huge screens on both sides of the plenary. And the amendment was just a very straightforward three-part summary of the crimes of Wall Street. And there was a gasp across the whole room. It was like Banquo's ghost or something like that. It was something, it just really shocked people to suddenly, in the reality of endless mumbo-jumbo of other resolutions that have been passed ritualistically year after year on various safe subjects that they get unanimous consent on, to suddenly throw a bomb like this on the screen. Immediately the chair accepted a motion to have it declared not germane to the budget deficit reduction resolution that we amended it to. We knew that had been pre-scripted. We expected that. So one of our supporters popped up and said, I appeal the chair's ruling. When someone rises to introduce an amendment, they put the amendment on two gigantic screens on either side of the podium. So everybody in the room was looking at this amendment for the 15 minutes or so that the debate was raging. And as soon as Representative Boland from Maine, who rose to introduce the amendment, you could hear murmurs, groans. It's a very mixed crowd. I was sitting to my left were a group of labor union officials, and to my right were a bunch of bankers. So they both had different responses. The union officials were very excited. The bankers were sort of chewing the rug. And then what you had was the representative from Maryland who clearly was chomping at the bit. And the supporters of Glass-Steagall from all of these states knew that they were in for a fight. In fact, one of them
in the morning going in said, okay, so let's all make sure everybody be at the microphone. We are not going to let them shut us up. They're going to try to shut us up. So make sure all of us have a microphone as soon as the resolution that we're introducing gets put on the screen. So that was the other thing that was kind of a shift, because they were not going into this naive. They had been at the committee meeting or been briefed on how the thing had been withdrawn, the intense kind of pressure. They all were expecting to get phone calls from the bankers and to, attempts to harass them into backing down. And they were ready for a fight. One of them said the night before, "Bring them on," because she was angry about the controlled nature of various other discussions. So the thing was introduced, it was put up on the screens, then immediately I think they went to Maryland because Delaware would have been too obvious. So a representative from Maryland gets up and says, "This resolution already has been withdrawn. I don't know why it was withdrawn, but you can't bring it up again, and it's not germane," which was the key. Then another representative, also from Delaware, but who is somewhat of a maverick, jumped up and he said, "What do you mean it's not germane? It says in the rules that amendments can be introduced from the floor. You don't even have to have them in writing. You had this one in writing beforehand. Of course it's germane. It's about Glass-Steagall, and we're talking about, So what happened was the chair then made her ruling that the amendment was not germane. So then the representative from Washington, Senator Chase from Washington, said, "I appeal the ruling of the chair." And that opened a debate on whether the thing was germane. And you had a representative or senator from Rhode Island who was arguing on behalf of the insurance companies that it was not germane. You had a completely sophistical argument from a senator from Utah who said Glass-Steagall is very important and it does merit a debate. However, this resolution is not the place. It has nothing to do with deficit reduction and something or other, and therefore it is not germane. And then Senator Chase said, well, if we're arguing about whether it's germane, let me tell you what Glass-Steagall would do. It would separate commercial from investment banking. It would mean that your savings could not be used to speculate by the big banks. It would mean that J.P. Morgan Chase could not become an owner of electrical companies or aluminum warehouses. She was very sharp and gave a very good and clear description of what Glass-Steagall was and why it was absolutely germane and relevant to this. And then the representative from Delaware spoke again, and others who were sponsors were waiting at the microphones to speak again. Many representatives who we, were just not sure that we knew were with us, but they've never spoken publicly before, were lining up at the microphones. So then someone from Minnesota said, well, I move that we vote on the motion of the chair that this is not germane.
So for 15 minutes, everybody in the room was on the edge of their seats. It was just broke completely clear of the entire dynamic of any of these conferences probably for years. And when it came to a question of how to have a vote on it, a person got up and insisted on a roll call vote, which definitely the chair did not want. 5 other delegations which were required jumped in and said, yes, we must have a roll call vote. And in the roll call vote, 1/3 of the states stood up and said, we have to have this debate, and in effect they were saying we have to have Glass-Steagall. 4 other states abstained, which meant that there was such a ferocious battle within their delegations they just could not come to a majority on one side or the other. And in many of the other delegations, even though they voted to ratify the chair's ruling that it was, quote-unquote, not germane, nevertheless, we know individuals in those delegations, including in Delaware, were ferociously in favor of Glass-Steagall.
In the 32 states, it's clear many of them will be turned to our side because many of those states are states where we have Glass-Steagall resolutions, but for various reasons of manpower and this and that, we haven't been able to fully inform all of the legislators. But I think most of them, were we able to get to them, and this really is the work of the people listening, they would be for Glass-Steagall in the next round.
It was just a tremendous proof that there are no tactics, there's no cute way to do these things. It's an accumulation of a lot of patient work with tremendous boldness at a key moment. And I can tell you that this is going to reverberate enormously, not just in the United States. A lot of international delegations were there. We were meeting with them. People from Australia, leaders in Australia, people from Nigeria, people from Portugal. The LaRouche factor there, the factor of the Glass-Steagall fight there, was an international strategic victory of great proportions.
At the same time the battle raged in Atlanta, congressional town hall meetings around the country continued to be forums for bold interventions by LaRouchePAC organizers and activists, delivering the message, bankrupt Wall Street, restore Glass-Steagall.
Thank you, Executive President. Now for years I've been trying to, I'll put it this way, Linda LaRouche has been implementing Glass-Steagall to bankrupt once and for all Wall Street for the destruction of states and around the world. Glass-Steagall must be re-implemented, which H.R. 129, and there's another one, S985, and there's another one with other representatives. But my question to you, since this is a life and death issue, because Franklin Roosevelt understood this, we have to destroy speculators. We have to destroy them before they kill us, and that's what's happening in Detroit. So as Americans, and I like the way you put it, it is the question of Americans coming up to their congressmen and challenging themselves and their congressmen to save this republic, this union. If we really want a future, sir, Mr. Congressman, and everybody else here, if you don't understand why Glass-Steagall right now must be implemented, that's number one, we will not survive. Just put it this way, if FDR did not sign that law, where would we as a nation become today? And it was removed in 1999. So I'm challenging everybody here to challenge our congressmen and everybody else to go back to Washington. Forget about the recess and ram this thing through. Because what I can tell you is that these crooks should be put in jail for the murders that they're causing.
Okay, Brian, well, thank you for the question. Glass-Steagall, some of you may remember it. For those who don't have a clear idea what the Glass-Steagall law used to be, it essentially put a firewall up that prevented banks, as we typically know them, that take depositors' money and then are able to do some things with it, like lend it out for a home purchase and so forth. That's what we're doing. It prevented them, this wall prevented those banks from acting like just straight out Wall Street investors, making investments in anything that was out there to invest in, because of the requirement to provide some security to your investment in your savings account, checking account, whatever else. In 1999, as Brian points out, the Glass-Steagall provisions were repealed. Glass-Steagall prevents the average American from having to suffer through the consequences of Wall Street playing with your money. And so I agree with Brian in that respect that we need to do something to reinstitute that firewall.
What I would say is that having to address this problem everywhere. I'm sure you're familiar with Glass-Steagall.
Yes.
Yay! These guys are bought up by Wall Street. That's why they're powerful. That's why we don't have impeachment already rolling.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
What's happening right now in Detroit, this is Cyprus coming here.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
It's like that old saying, sometimes last defense is a good offense. If we get Glass-Steagall, they're bankrupt.
That's right.
This derivatives bubble is going to suffocate Wall Street. These are Obama's puppet masters. So I'm saying it would address everything. Will you co-sign?
Yeah.
Ricardo Lopez. So I think it's been pretty evident that the biggest welfare recipients are on Wall Street. These are the biggest criminals. They've rigged the LIBOR rates, which have created artificial fiscal problems for local governments, school boards. We know that we've given them government bailout. We know that the Fed buys their worthless securities through quantitative easing. We're talking on the order of billions a month, which amounts to trillions and trillions of dollars that go to the most criminal financial institutions that have been involved in money laundering. Now, there is a bill to restore Glass-Steagall. Most of you that know the history about FDR taking on the Wall Street crooks from a wheelchair know that he regulated the banks and instituted principles of the Constitution for a reason, because, as he said, we needed to throw the money chambers out of the money changers out of the temple. Will you help make sure that your colleagues on the Hill stop acting like prostitutes for Wall Street and fight to restore Glass-Steagall? Thank you.
So I haven't co-sponsored that bill yet, but I'm certainly open-minded to it and looking at it. I don't sit on the House Finance Committee, and it's something that I think we need to continue to look at, because I want to make sure that Wall Street and our banking system primarily is operating for the benefit of the consumers and not the bankers or wealthy corporations. So I will continue to support pro-consumer legislation, and I will continue to look at the Glass-Steagall implementation legislation. But your point's well taken, and I do appreciate you raising it.
Hi, Congressman. My name is Ryan McCusker. I'm from Cranston. And I want to preface my question to you with a vision that I share that reflects my understanding of our nation's history, which is that when George Washington defeated the British militarily, he worked with Alexander Hamilton to charter a national bank. And that national bank funded the public infrastructure projects, which were instrumental in promoting domestic production. They imposed tariffs to protect domestic manufacturers and agriculture. And afterwards, later presidents were inspired to follow in that tradition, such as John Quincy Adams with canal construction and also railway production. And later, Lincoln, during the Civil War, with the greenback system, financed the world's most modern transportation system with rail production throughout the continent. Later, after the destruction wreaked upon our nation by Wall Street, Franklin Roosevelt and Pecora prosecuted those bankers and built large water and power projects to improve the health of our communities across the country. Later, presidents with visions such as Eisenhower with the Atoms for Peace program, and Kennedy with the Apollo project and his vision for fusion energy and the benefits that turning that technology into an energy source for the world would have. What I see is that this is the time where we have a crisis being created by Wall Street. And we have legislation which would rightfully precede their prosecution in a new Pecora Commission. And that legislation is Glass-Steagall. There's a House bill. Sheldon Whitehouse has signed on as Senator of Rhode Island to the Senate bill. And I see a bright future that would create economic prosperity, productivity, and that's what inspires me to ask you to sign on to Glass-Steagall.
Thanks. I appreciate your question. I haven't ruled it out.
There remain 3 more weeks until Congress is scheduled to come back into session. During those 3 weeks, town hall meetings will continue around the country, and you will have the opportunity to attend these meetings and intervene. Use the LaRouchePAC website to find the meetings coming up in your area. Contact us to receive your marching orders or to report on your activity.
Anyone knows history at all knows that nobody with any guts is going to submit to this process. That only the worst kinds of cowards would not fight to the last breath their last breath to defeat these bastards. That's been the record of mankind, of fighters. And I'm a fighter in my own ways. I will never give up on this issue. I will do whatever is necessary to be effective, or as effective as possible, to defend my nation, defend my republic, and defend it against British and any other scoundrels who want to crush us. Wall Street, I defy them. And I suggest to my fellow citizens they not be cowards either, and join me in defying these characters. What Wall Street intends to do is virtually destroy most of the people of this nation. And anybody who tolerates Wall Street's policy is a disgusting coward. I don't care how many threats are coming out of the Wall Street crowd against people to cause them to capitulate. No honest person faced with this kind of issue, a threat to mankind, a threat to our nation, will ever give in. We will defy them to the end. We don't care what threats they make. We will fight to the end. And we will fight not just to the end, but to the end of defeating them and removing their power. And it's only to the degree that we stick to that policy, that we allow no cowardice among us, that we're determined to defy these people to the end and beat them. And if we don't capitulate, and if we don't weep and cry and beg over, oh, I can't take any more, you take what you have to take. People have died in struggles to defend the rights of fellow mankind. And that's the way to do it. If you haven't got the guts, well, go hide yourself someplace.